let's see, I'm just making sure.
And
I've
is this
done,
going to be a video recording also? So should I be like looking at you and not like, sometimes when I think I'm sort of looking like this, but should I try and be on screen?
well, that's kind of up to you. I don't have much of like a YouTube following or anything like
Yeah.
that. And I've just started posting a lot of my podcasts and other
Yeah.
things to YouTube. Um,
Yeah.
I can post this to YouTube if you're
Sure.
okay with it and if you'd
Sure.
like that.
Yeah. Sure.
But I don't have to.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I read that right as I found it. So I ran and like got out of my exercise clothes and put on a sweater. Like, I can hear too.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, about 20 minutes ago, I woke up early and went mountain biking this morning. And I, I don't mountain bike a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I was like flying off the trail into bushes and stuff, and my allergies just been going nuts. And
Oh
so
yeah.
about a half hour ago, this eye was kind of swollen and bright
Oh
red.
yeah.
And so I was like trying to,
That's exactly like me. Because the reason I lost my contact lens, I was driving down the road and it was just, there was something and it hurt so much. I just had to get it out of my eye. So I just popped it out because they're gas permeable lenses. And then I don't know where it went, somewhere in the car. I still haven't actually located it. I looked and I don't know. It's got to be somewhere in the driver's seat somewhere. I can't find it. So it's probably in some crevice that I will never see again. But anyway,
yeah.
so yeah, it was all swollen too. But
Well, it looks like we're both right at our best. So cool. Well, should we dive in here?
sure, go for it.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And so you're Jennifer Finlayson-Fife.
Mm-hmm.
I've known of you for a long time. I first heard about you on, I don't know, it was probably on a podcast somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then my wife and I took a few of your classes. We took the relationship course, the sexuality course, and then my wife did the art of desire course.
Mm-hmm.
And we really enjoyed it. At the time in our relationship, it was really, really helpful. And we almost even felt to some extent like we were sort of led to find that, because it's what we needed just right at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we really enjoyed your courses. And now whenever I see that you've been on other podcasts that I run into, I always like to listen because I always feel like you have so much good insight and obviously experience, because you are a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Or
yes, that's right. I'm a licensed therapist in Illinois.
Okay.
And then I also do quite a bit of coaching online with couples, particularly that have been taking my courses and need more specific input from me on their situation. And then I also do quite a bit of teaching. I did teaching at a college level for a few years, but I also do online courses and lots of live workshops and things, primarily for LDS couples. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in your practice in Illinois, do you work mostly with LDS couples, or is it a wide variety?
It's, well, when I first started, it was kind of half and half. And then when I did the online courses, I almost don't see people in person anymore. I mean, I do, maybe 5% of my clients are local, but mostly LDS, and then mostly doing kind of coaching and teaching is what I've been doing a lot more of. So, but it's excellent work. I really love it. It's very satisfying to help people get stronger and clearer and happier. So It's really great.
Absolutely. Now, I would say about half, I mentioned this to you already, but about half of my audience is LDS and the other half is not.
Yes.
But what I found is that a lot of the stuff that you talk about, even though, you sometimes use terminology that is maybe a little more LDS specific. But the principles that you teach are not, unique to religious people.
That's
necessarily. Right. They apply to everybody. So
right. Lots of non-LDS people do take my courses because there are, concepts of Christianity and what it means to be Christian and what it means in a context of a marriage or parenting. But yeah, they're broader human principles that have a lot of foundational elements in faith and specifically Christianity. So I'm certainly drawing on those. but yes, it's really trying to help people have true principles to really understand what they're doing in their lives that's interfering with their happiness and their ability for capacity for intimacy, both emotional and sexual,
Yeah.
and helping people be able to see better what the impediments are so they're more able to address them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, a lot of times that's really what keeps people stuck is they can't see what they don't know, or they can't see what they're blind to, quite literally, in themselves. And so they keep trying often, but are kind of spinning in the without any real traction because they can't see what they're missing. And so I really try to help people be more awake, which sometimes hurts. It's hard to see ourselves, but then it liberates us. Mm-hmm.
Right. Now you do general relationship coaching and counseling, but you also specialize in sexuality.
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that's, sorry, I'm just adjusting my screen here. Okay. So I think if it's okay, that's a little bit more of what I would like to focus on today, the questions that I have for you. I think, well, I think when it comes to relationships, it's all kind of intertwined, and one thing affects other things, but
Yes.
Sexuality issues are such a common problem, and particularly in LDS cultures, there aren't too many people tackling
Yes.
those challenges. There are more
Yes.
now, but it seems like when Christians or LDS people specifically are looking to find answers to sexuality problems, they're scared to know where to
That's
go because you don't want to run into the wrong source.
right.
Or you get so many differing opinions outside of Christianity or
Right.
the LDS faith specifically. And so,
And there's a lot
um,
of fear around it.
right,
I think in general among Christian faiths, there's often an anxiety that sexuality is antithetical to godliness or to being Christ-like. And so there's this sort of, you want to resolve something or figure it out so it can be a good part of your marriage, but and kind of ambivalence or anxiety that maybe the wrong sources will pull you into destructive paths. And certainly that can be true. And I think by what you're saying, that often there aren't good resources, or there's a general kind of silence about it, which is really unhelpful for people.
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Well, I wrote up I wrote up some questions, so I'm just going to read these straight from my
Sure.
list here. So the first question, we've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit, maybe a little more about yourself and why you became a therapist focusing on relationships and sexuality?
Sure. Well, honestly, I was kind of one of those kids that at a very young age was, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I was always thinking about relationships and why people do the things they do, and very specifically, why so many people seemed unhappily married. And I was just like a little social scientist when I was a little kid, and I cared about it a lot. And I was, growing up in a traditional culture, I did not anticipate going to college beyond getting married. I didn't really, but I really did have this desire to help people. But I was a little bit afraid that, like, somehow I shouldn't pursue that level of education given my family culture and sort of broader church culture. But I really just felt drawn to it, and I ultimately decided to follow that in my heart. And as I was doing a lot of I was really interested in women's issues. I was interested in understanding, women and depression and why that seems so prevalent. And so I was just kind of looking into what were these sort of gender ideologies, what did they mean? And then when I was in my PhD program, I was asked to teach a human sexuality course to the undergraduates at Boston College, which is a Jesuit school. And so I started teaching those courses, and the men and women that were writing the essays and so on, it just helped me see how much ambivalence there was within Catholic culture, for example, about sexuality, more so among the women than the men. And I was looking for a dissertation topic, and so it made me think maybe I should look at LDS women's experiences. Is there a double standard? Do all the feminist reading I had done as an undergrad and in grad school, do Latter-day Saint women have some of the hypothesized ambivalence and non-agency, meaning this sense of disconnection from their sexuality that many feminist writers would say happens in patriarchy? So that was ultimately what shaped my dissertation research. And then so I wrote my dissertation on Mormon women and sexual agency, and looked at whether or not a particular feminist critique was an apt critique, and ultimately how it was and how it was not. So that was my research, which was very interesting. And then I was home with my kids for a number of years, but then when I started to open a practice, I was interviewed and started, interviewed on my dissertation research, and it kind of went viral in a sense. And, I then people were inviting me to come and present and do things. And so it just kind of blossomed from there. And I should say this other piece, I always did want to work with marriage relationships. So that was kind of the underlying theme of my PhD work. I was always looking for those kinds of internships and so on. But anyway, so it just led me right into what I really love, which is helping couples be happier and be at peace with their sexuality, and have sexuality be able to be an important part of being in a marital friendship, meaning to have people be more at peace with themselves and more able to express themselves and love through their sexuality. And so that's a lot of what my goals and work have been about. So, yeah.
Great. So I'm just curious, with your research, did you find that LDS women had a lot of the same ambivalence that?
Definitely. So yes, I could spend a couple hours just on that question alone, but yes, a lot of the hypothesized, the research, the theory I was looking at was the impact of patriarchy, or more specifically gender role ideology, on women's anxieties and disconnection from their own sexuality. And there was lots of different ways in which that gets expressed. And so the majority of the women that I interviewed, I did 4 to 6 hour long interviews spread out over, a few sessions, but of looking at premarital experience, postmarital experience. And yes, the majority of the women I interviewed had all those anxieties, this sense that their sexuality shouldn't belong to them, eroticism is not feminine, that they shouldn't be the ones that initiate or something's wrong, that they need to have enough desire to keep the man happy, but not so much that it feels like a threat. Those kinds of things were very much alive in the themes of the interviews. That if they did too much premaritally, that it would discredit them and make them less desirable, much more so than it would for a man. Like it was much more forgivable in a man. That it wasn't okay to say no, or you would then threaten your value to the man. So all these kinds of things. So, sexuality was really seen as a mechanism for being acceptable in marriage, much more than a kind of core and fundamental part of oneself. And so that was the case for the majority of the women I interviewed. On the other hand, there was a minority of women who had really embraced and accepted a conservative sexual ethic, right? That's consistent with Mormonism, but also for many Christian faiths, of course. And so they'd really embraced that conservative view, but without the sexism. So they would say things like, look, God expects men and women to be chaste before marriage. God expects, and this isn't about keeping myself acceptable to a man. This is about my relationship to the divine and the kind of person I want to be. And it's in line with my own aspirations that I want to be in an exclusive marriage, meaning I want to save my sexual self and my expression of my sexuality with someone I'm committed to. And my faith supports that the men do the same. So they actually saw the theology as supporting what they ultimately wanted. And very importantly, they had stripped it of any sexism. And they had also, they functioned very much, whether or not they even saw themselves this way, they very much functioned as equals in their marriage. So they were collaborators in decision making, and often in providing economically for the family. And so they had a strong sense of self, and that was expressed through their sexuality as well. And so they didn't necessarily think of themselves as rebellious or rejecting of the kind of cultural expectations. They just were very comfortable in who they were, and were comfortable in their sexuality as well. And so it was just interesting to see how had these women, how had some really been sort of shaped by some of these cultural messages, and why had others rejected them and maybe held on to the best in those cultural and religious messages. So yeah, so that was the work I did. And I use a lot of those things that I learned in my Art of Desire course in helping women to basically embrace their sexuality for their own benefit and for their own strength, really,
Right.
about being enough for a man.
Great. So the next question, one of the common problems that I run into with my clients, as well as in my own marriage, is the challenge of creating a romantic and sexual relationship that meets the needs and desires of both partners. In your experience, what does a healthy romantic and sexual relationship look like? And what are the key attitudes of husbands and wives that help create this relationship?
Okay, good. That's a big question. So you might have to come back to some of it so I don't forget it. But can you just go back to the beginning of that question? Because I had about 17 ideas that came to my head there.
So common problem is creating a romantic and sexual relationship that is satisfying, meets the needs and desires of both partners.
Got it. Yes. Okay. Okay, let's start with that. So yeah. So I would say that, first of all, let's just be clear that this is a big challenge from a developmental perspective. To create a thriving, romantic, sexually and emotionally intimate partnership is not easy. That's why so many people don't have it. Okay, and it's not easy because developmentally it requires a lot of us. Most particularly, and what I think most people struggle with, is the ability to tolerate being knowable and knowing their partner. A lot of us want the validation of somebody who's going to caretake us or make us feel strong and validate our desirability and our goodness. I think a lot of us get married hoping for that. And then when that gets punctured and shredded by the realities of marriage, those of us that tolerate that process and allow the honesty, the potential honesty of dealing with differences, of dealing with who you really are, dealing with who your spouse really is, and growing up and still creating a meaningful, honest partnership, that takes a tremendous amount of courage that a lot of us do not have. And I think we often don't even know that we're doing it. We participate in making our marriages be dead and seemingly safe. And so, you know, I'm often struck by how much couples collude in a dishonest, you know, a kind of love is to pretend that I feel something I don't feel, or I believe something I don't believe, or I, you know, want something I don't want, and or pressure you to pretend so that I'm comfortable, you know, and couples often do this as a way of creating a stability, but the resentments or the lack of growth or the lack of honesty will kill passion very, very quickly. So there's that issue. And then there's the issue of sexual integration. I mean, I've got so many concepts to say, but basically being at peace with your sexuality and being able to speak in the language of sexuality is its own challenge. Now, a lot of people think that's got to be the problem. My wife is so repressed. I'm fine. Okay. And that's, just get Dr. Finlayson-Fife to solve her and then we'll be good. So I get a lot of that. Okay. And, you know, often there is an issue there. Oftentimes the woman that's grown up in a Christian tradition is often going to be much more anxious about her sexuality because it's antithetical to her goodness and her desirability, and she's been taught to be rejecting of it on some level. So that is often an issue, but I also find that it's an issue with men much more than men actually recognize, and I can say more about that later. So there is this issue of how at peace you are with your sexuality and whether or not you're really willing to integrate this part of being human and create goodness with it and through it. But then often the foundation upon which that's a reality is what is the state of the marriage? How honest is it? How real is it? How safe is it? And what are the dynamics that are at play? And so often that's where sometimes I'm working on the sexuality right up front, but oftentimes I'm starting with what's actually happening in this couple, and are they even sitting on a foundation in which sexuality could thrive?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So then I think there was another part of your question that so what are some of the attitudes or?
Yeah,
Yes.
the key attitudes of husbands and wives that can create a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And what does a healthy sexual relationship look like?
Well, so good. So I think, first of all, I think that when an important attitude is that people understand that a marriage, at least in modern Western culture, is a sexual relationship. So that is to say, and it's based on the concept of choosing. And so those both have to be clear in the couples that thrive. The couples that thrive, I should say, those are clear concepts. So what I mean by that is that people hold true to and are honest about two foundational elements. The first is that this is a partnership of choosing. That's the basis of romanticism. And I am a romantic. I mean, I don't even know, maybe that's my fallibility, but I really do value this idea that, all other familial relationships are sort of biological and you love them because they're yours. Okay. But partnership is chosen. How to say, you're the person that I choose with all your dysfunction and all my dysfunction. I choose you. Okay.
Yeah.
You're my first choice. And I choose to bring my best to you. And it's not that I couldn't be attracted to other people or couldn't choose other people, but you're the one I choose. And that's a meaning that we all, I think, that out of a crowd, this special person was drawn to me. That's the basis of romanticism and sexual excitement, I think, that this person finds me desirable. That precisely what would be disgusting to many other people to do with me, to her or him, they find it exciting, that I am being welcomed, that I'm being received, accepted. And that's really, we all want that, I think. It's going back to our roots, even as babies, where we were, at least those of us that were born into parents that loved us and embraced us and accepted us, was this sense of, as a baby, you had to do nothing to be fully accepted in all your sensuality. Kissed, squeezed, every roll of fat was adored. You just had to bang your spoon and parents would swoon, okay? And we, as we get older, we lose a lot of that. More is expected of us. There's the social norms, the expectations of what we're supposed to do. But I think we're looking still for this sense of full acceptance, to be loved all the way through. That's at the core of romanticism. And you found this special one who is just intensely interested in you and you with them. And so we want that in marriage. Now, we don't necessarily want to offer it. We want to receive it.
Right.
More than we want to offer it. A lot of us are like, well, I would be attracted if you weren't doing these other 4 stupid things. Okay, but you owe me attraction even when I'm doing stupid things. And so we want it more than we want to give it. But that's really at the core of a thriving relationship, is I choose you. And I think in marriage you choose, first of all, I'm not here to say that you always must choose the person you chose. Sometimes it becomes poor judgment to continue to choose someone, or you need to unchoose for some reason. But I think in a marriage where you're saying, I really do choose you, I'm not going anywhere, a lot of us try to be in it without doing that work of choosing. But what I think that is, say, I want to be married. I don't want a divorce, but I don't want to be married, right? A lot of us do that and are blind to the fact that we're doing that to our spouse. I want you to want me sexually. I don't want to invest and want you. So a lot of people do that. But if you're really going to choose, what it means is not that you just put up with anything, but that you say, I'm bringing my best to this partnership. I'm willing to confront things in myself. I'm willing to confront things that are between us that are interfering with both of us thriving. I'm willing to talk honestly to you about things that are interfering, not with the point of being superior to you or making you feel bad, but with the end of really creating something more sustainable. That's what it is to choose somebody. You're invested in creating something good for both of you. And when people know this person is invested, even though they bring up hard things or they don't, always, buy into everything I'm trying to sell as a legitimate idea, that really creates the basis of thoughtful romanticism. When we first fall in love, it's not so thoughtful. It's just like biologically driven, dopamine's flooding the brain. You're just like, oh, this person's amazing. When it's mature love, it's knowing love. It's love based in knowledge, and you understand and you see. But that's the best kind, is this person knows me, all my flaws, my limitations, and they still are mad about me. They still choose me. That is deeply, deeply gratifying. Those are the happiest people, actually. Yeah. But it takes some courage to create that, because you have to be willing to deal with yourself. People that won't self-confront will never be happily partnered. It's just the deal. And so that's one of the attitudes. You have to be willing to look at yourself. So anyway, I feel like there's, I'm like saying so much, I feel like I've kind of lost the question. But I think another important attitude I should just say is that, that my sexuality, it matters. You can't really create a thriving partnership if you don't want to deal with your sexuality. And a lot of people don't want to deal with it.
Right.
And what they're creating with it. And a lot of us are creating destructive patterns, whether it's through our indulgence sexually or our repression sexually. They're both problematic in marriage. And we tend to want to think repression somehow more virtuous than indulgence. But I think if you're in a marriage and you're not dealing with what you do with your sexuality, it's destructive. So I think that's an important attitude, that I'm actually creating goodness in this partnership through my sexuality, not through just accommodating the other person, right? But by creating something that we both enjoy, that we find a way for us to both thrive. That's what it requires. Mm-hmm. And when you're both willing to collaborate, you can work across differences without a lot of pain and difficulty, when you really are willing to look at yourselves and create something mutual. But a lot of times we're partnered with people that don't want to do that, or we ourselves don't want to do that. Mm-hmm.
Great. This is going to be one of those podcasts where I'm going to have to go back and listen about 10 times to get all of the good stuff that's in there.
Yeah.
So you teach both a couples sexuality course and the Women's Art of Desire course. And the stigma is that men are usually the higher desire partner in a sexual relationship. And while that may be true in many cases, it's definitely not universally true. Mm-hmm. So in your couples sexuality course, you say, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this, that women may have a greater capacity than men for sexual pleasure. Mm-hmm. Yes. So if this is true, in your experience, what are the challenges that are facing many women from experiencing that greater sexual enjoyment and desire? Mm-hmm. And what can, well, maybe that first, and then what can husbands do to support their wives to allow them to enjoy that part of their sexuality?
Okay, so I think what I would say is, first of all, I'll go on a limb and just say, generally speaking, women just simply do have more sexual capacity, but women are pickier about where they bring their sexuality. So from just a psychobiological perspective, women have a lot more to lose, in a sense. It's a lot more vulnerable to be sexual, to open up your body to another person. You can get pregnant, get a disease, and so women, I think the right way to say it are kind of erotic, emotive, sensual creatures. I mean, if I'm going to just stereotype us for a moment, the way women are put together, generally speaking, are more sensitive to feeling. There's sort of lots of stereotypes around this sort of earthy, emotive creature that is female, okay? And that's a lovely part of being female. So women, and the research shows this, are much more, their bodies will actually become aroused by a much broader range of stimuli than men, right? Men will be like, this is what I like, and then when they see that thing, their body responds, but sort of what they don't like, their body doesn't respond. Women, our bodies are responding to all kinds of things, even things that they would not like at all. Okay. And the researchers was like, is that just because women are so repressed because their bodies are becoming aroused, but they aren't saying they want something? And I think that speaks right to this. Okay, I may be in response to a lot of the stimuli around me, but that's very different than I choose to be sexual.
Mm-hmm.
So when things are and again, I'm speaking in stereotypes, and this is not always the case because it can be the opposite for men and women. But I think for many women, they may like sex, and they putting aside the kind of cultural repressions or where people haven't developed their sexuality. There are many women who like sex, that they want to have good sex, but they don't want the sex that they're having in their marriage. They don't want what's happening there, and so they sort of shut it down and they lose interest. They become a lower desire person, but somewhat artificially. It looks like it's about a lack of capacity when really it's a lack of interest in the sex that's available to them. And I can speak more of that in a second, but it doesn't get addressed very honestly or dealt with very honestly because of some of the ambivalences women have about their own sexuality, and some of the ambivalences men have, because I think men are socialized into the idea that women's sexuality exists for them on some level and exists to reinforce them. And I think a lot of men and women co-construct a dynamic of the woman kind of sliding underneath the men psychologically and sexually. And she looks super low desire because that's not very fun sexuality. And it reinforces the man's ego and feeling like he's got it all worked out and she doesn't, and he's comfortable with sex and she isn't. But it masks his own ambivalence about really letting, well, the man and the woman may both be ambivalent about really letting the depth and capacity actually come forward. And so women are pickier, but the thing is women are slower to become aroused. So if you keep the focus on how men like to have sex, which let me just be a little bit more fair. I should say how men are able to have sex. Men can become aroused quite quickly, and reach climax relatively quickly. And so if you're doing it on what men can do, women will look defective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and especially if men are anxious because things are not going well sexually between themselves and their partner, they're going to be more prone to premature orgasm. And so if they're having premature orgasm, then it's happening even quicker than they want it to. And it may look like they're at least sexually successful because they were able to reach climax. But the woman looks, by comparison, dead on arrival, like not sexually able. So women are slower to become aroused. And if it's what men are capable of, women look defective by comparison. But if you are able to do it more on women's timetable, okay, and women become aroused, right? Then when women are really aroused, and again, they can be picky, so they can be harder to get aroused, and I can talk about more of that if you want. But, once women are aroused, they can stay aroused, and they can have multiple orgasms, most women.
Right.
Even if they're not multiply orgasmic, if you're very aroused, women can have very intense and deep orgasms that sort of expand through their whole body and their whole soul, right? And so, men are more phallic focused and women are more body focused. And that is to say, while the vulva and the clitoris are an important part of their arousal, the whole body and their minds are a very important part of arousal. And so I think women's sexual pleasure is more diffused through the body, right, as well. So I think women, when they do open up and do choose and are aroused, can be that a man can see how deep and profound and extensive her capacity for pleasure is, but only if you're a man who's not threatened by that and is willing to invest in what it would require in a partnership and in a marriage, and the woman's willing to invest and let herself be strong and let herself be expressive and let herself be knowable to really know and see that difference. So it hides in plain sight often.
Mm-hmm. I've read many studies where kind of men's greatest satisfaction sexually is in providing in pleasure for their spouse.
Absolutely. Yes.
More so than receiving the pleasure themselves.
Yes. And this is a wonderful part of male sexuality. I mean, really, it's profoundly generous and wonderful. And yet I think that it can go two directions. Let me see if I can name all this. I think on the one hand, some women will say, but it's all about him. He's saying, was it good for you? But what he's really asking is, am I good enough? Right? So that so much of his sense of self is getting measured through her pleasure that she feels very pressured to manage his ego through her pleasure. And this is why people will fake orgasms and all these kinds of things. And so it doesn't feel generous. Now, I'm not saying that this is all the man's fault, because that's a kind of collusion in making it all about the man, okay?
Right.
And the woman's participating in it. But she may feel like, it's very hard for me to orgasm because I'm trying to manage him feeling successful. And so I feel all this pressure, so I'm actually not having that much pleasure, precisely because he wants it so much, right? Then there's also people who actually can track and know that they are partnered with somebody, with a man who is sexually generous, who really does want good for them, who wants to give to them, not just because it reinforces him, even though it may feel good to him and to be able to offer that, but because they really do want their spouse to be happy and satisfied, and they feel good about offering that, but that the woman may feel afraid of that, afraid of the exposure in it, afraid to receive it, afraid to acknowledge it's true, because it's often easier to be in a victim position and to say, this is all about you, when maybe in my honesty of my heart, I know that's not fair, but I'd rather keep it in that frame so I don't have to deal with my own anxiety about receiving and my own anxiety about my own sexual capacity and pleasure. And, I think a lot of, good intimate sexuality requires the ability to sustain our sense of self and to tolerate not having validation at every moment. This is fundamental to honest marriages. But even in sexuality, for a woman and man for that matter, to be able to orgasm is to be able to trust that you can sort of step away from the connection in a sense. I mean, I don't mean that you don't know your partner's there giving to you, but to be able to move into your own experience and express yourself, and to trust that they will be okay, that you will be okay, that they can see you in this way, that you can in a sense be vulnerable in that way, if that's the right way to say it, that exposed and still be okay. And I think for a lot of people that's so terrifying, for whatever their histories are or where they are in their development, that they just would rather say, let's just make it about you. And there's kind of a reinforcement of, I don't really want to show up here. I don't really want to take that risk. And so a lot of times couples keep it that way, even though it's to their mutual detriment.
So when it comes to a couple, husband and wife, let me see how I want to ask this. So would you suggest to a husband and wife that they both are kind of opening themselves up to enjoy that pleasure and stuff like that? Or is it one of those things where the husband focuses on giving that pleasure and the wife focuses on receiving that pleasure?
Yeah, in my classes, the online courses, I do give couples exercises where they quite literally, without the goal being orgasm, that there is a deliberate shift of focus where the woman focuses on receiving and the husband on giving, just pleasure and sensuality, and really literally quite honestly expanding your ability to receive and to self-accept. And for many women, this is a very important exercise. It kind of goes right against what culturally they've been taught to do. And it oftentimes allows a different kind of giving and receiving to happen in the marriage. So I think this is a really important piece. And I think for a lot of women, it means shifting how they conceptualize themselves. I know for myself, when I first got married, I really understood that I had married a person that was more capable of loving than the marriage I had seen in my parents, right? So that is to say, I knew this person really loved me and really chose me, and I was afraid of it. And I would tend to want to dismiss it or kind of reduce it or somehow make it more selfish than it was, because I knew how to do that, you know, and I knew how to feel on top of that. And I knew, thankfully, that I was being dishonest and unfair. So I pushed myself to like, I need to just settle down and receive what's here, even if I'm not sure that I'm worthy of it. And this is not really how I would think. I have never been, well, I should say, at least at that point in my life, I wasn't the kind of person that was like, oh, I'm so unworthy. I was more like, yeah, I'm worthy, you know, I'm more defensive, you know what I mean? And yet the truth of it was, I really did question, am I really worth, he loves me, but maybe he's just blind. Okay, maybe it's because he's too clueless or something. And I was afraid I was not enough, really. And so I was afraid if I just stopped trying to control it and let him really see me and give to me, that I would be found wanting. And I just thought, you know, it's still unfair. And even if I am, then I've got to deal with that. But I need to stop doing this. And I just remember like really pushing myself to just receive it and accept what I could feel was real. And it was quite literally like shifting my sense of myself. And it was uncomfortable. It's strange. You know, you think, well, what's wrong with just feeling better about yourself or accepting the goodness that's out there? But I think we're quite afraid of it often. And we're afraid of the exposure, and what I think we say often in the culture is the vulnerability of it, you know, the perceived vulnerability. And so, but I think as I let myself do that, it did expand my sense of myself and who we were as a couple, and that I really was chosen. And I think that then really allowed me to trust more, to be more open, to be more expressive, more honest, you know. And so, but that's a step that takes some courage.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you
I've
can't
noticed.
make your partner do it either, you know.
Right.
You can be clear about what you're giving, but you can't necessarily make somebody acknowledge it with you. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that in my own relationship. My wife and I, we both agree that we want an amazing marriage, and we can kind of paint the picture of what we want, but when it comes to actually taking the steps to getting there,
Mm-hmm.
that requires growing up. It requires going into uncharted territory for us
Mm-hmm.
of maturity and stuff. And it's like, well,
Yes.
I know what, like, I'm comfortable in my area of immaturity, and I
Yes.
know what that includes, all the good and the bad.
Yep.
And I could probably make it through my life right here.
Yep.
I know something is better, but it's also scary because I don't know
Absolutely.
what else is.
It's always scary, and that's my favorite understanding of faith, is that you can feel there's a higher way. There's
Right.
something, there's truth out there. There's a view that's above where you currently are functioning, and you can feel it. But it takes courage. I mean, faith is really highly linked to courage, to reach for something that you feel but don't fully know yet. And that's the virtue in it, is the courage. Right? And so, yes, absolutely. I think the thing when I was saying earlier that I like so much about the work I do is it's very inspiring to watch people do that. That they are terrified. You know, you're pointing out something to them that they do not want to be true about themselves, or they don't want to face, and they've got this, like, they've got their, I don't know how to explain it, but they're like holding on to the edge of the cliff, you know, with a fierceness, right? And the more that it's getting challenged by their spouse or by the therapist, like that sometimes the more they're just hanging on for dear life, kicking and screaming, because they're terrified of letting go of the ego or the self-concept that has been part of their sense of self, and yet it's their prison. And
Right.
so when I watch people have the courage to just like peel their knuckles off the edge and allow themselves to let go of a way of thinking about themselves or reality, and let their mind scramble and their body scramble, in a sense, in a new reality that's more true, you know, you see them get reorganized at a higher level of functioning. You see them be more able to love and be loved. And it's really amazing to watch it. But it's that moment of courage, like, that for me is always like where you see the best in humanity, is that willingness to sacrifice your comfort and your soothing self-conceptions for something that you know is better and scarier and more uncertain, but you know is ultimately hurting you and your partner if you keep hanging on. And, and the reward is a freer life, a happier life. But I'm often like, it's so much better on the other side, just let go. But people often aren't convinced.
Yeah.
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 And people are good at, keeping their own self-deceptions alive. So
Right.
sometimes they win in that.
So we're running
Yes.
short on time. I know you have a client soon. So
Yes.
I guess the last question would be, if you can, in the next few minutes, could you give for I hope this makes sense, but could you give maybe 1 or 2 or 3 steps that couples could take who are struggling with sexuality? I know when I coach people, there are a few steps that pretty much everybody could do to improve their relationship. And are there 2 or 3 steps maybe that pretty much anybody could do?
Yeah.
To improve
Okay.
it?
Take my courses. No. Call in with any questions. But beyond that, let's see. I mean, I think, what's the thing your spouse always complains about you? What's the thing they're always pushing on? Okay. And it makes them unhappy. It undermines their well-being. Okay. Or at least they're saying it does.
Uh-huh.
And what is it that is true in what they're saying? Now, a lot of times people are complaining about things in part as a way to not deal with their limitations. Do you know what I mean? So they are in part keeping something immature alive in themselves through the complaint. And I'm going to assume for a moment that that's true with your spouse, whoever's listening to this, okay? But what is in fact true about what they're saying? What is it that you've got to deal with? Is at least true about you. Let's say they think it's true about you 90% of the time, and you're going to acknowledge it's true 10% of the time. Even though they're closer to the truth than you are, go with the 10%. Start there. Where is it true? Where am I being, self-serving? When is it true that I can be selfish at their expense? Or when is it true that I try to sell some idea of my own weakness to not have to take responsibility for my life? Or whatever it is. And that should be at least step 1. Then maybe that's step 1 and 2, I don't know. But step 1, and then, deal with it. That is to say, what do I need to do to truly deal with this? Stop making it their problem. Because a lot of times we will do this irresponsible step of sort of making it our spouse's problem that they don't like this thing about us, rather than what I'm doing is immature, hurtful, and undermines my partnership. And therefore, if I want a good partnership, I need to deal with it. Stop making it their issue to have to bring up and hit me over the head with a million times a day. If I don't want my spouse to nag, deal with it. So you go deal with it. And then maybe step 3 is or you can do the 2 and 3 can be interchangeable, but you talk honestly to your spouse about what you've been doing that's been hurting them. That you're willing to say, look, I know I do this thing to you. I know I act like I can pull one over on you and do this, and I'm sorry, and I am addressing it. Okay, you will then go have better sex. I promise. I mean, this is just talking about the part of the foundation. I mean, we could talk about things you could do around your sexuality and what ambivalences you have, but that would be like, 50 steps down. But anyway, so, but like just starting with, what do I know I need to deal with that I use my spouse to not deal with? And if you stop doing that, you're becoming a more trustworthy person and a more desirable person. Because the people we find desirable in marriage, it has less to do, thankfully, with body shape than it has to do with character and who this person really is in my life.
Right.
And so, function in a way that is desirable. That's the best antidote to a spouse who doesn't desire you is you at least know you're functioning in a desirable way and in a respect-worthy way.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. So I've taken your classes, or I've taken a couple of them. My wife has done 3 of them, and we loved them. They were very helpful. I can definitely speak to that. For those that are interested in doing some of your classes and getting some of your help, where can they go, and what
So if you go to
resources
my
are available?
website, which is just my name, so Finlayson-Fife.com. And on my website, you'll see just online courses as one of the tabs. There's also a podcast tab where you can just see other podcasts that I've done. But the online courses are there, and I have 4 of how to talk to your kids about sex, a women's sexuality course, and then 2 couples courses, a relationship course and a couples sexuality course. And then I'm also going to be doing one on men's sexuality, probably in the winter is when I'll do it. So I just have to get the dates on the calendar. But yeah, it's all there. And then there's also workshops and things like that. And you don't have to be LDS to benefit from these or participate in the workshops or anything like that. So yeah, that's where you can find me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great talking to you, and I wish that we had another hour, because I've got an hour's worth of questions still.
Exactly.
But,
there's so much to say.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I'll let you know when I post this. It'll be next Wednesday is when I'm planning to post it.
Great.
And I'll let Ruby know, or
yeah, perfect. And then
whatever.
we'll post it onto my stuff as well. So.
And then, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if you can link to it in your show notes, I don't know if you do that, but you could maybe make it so people can get there easier. Yeah.
Yep, I definitely will.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. Thanks so much, Greg. It was fun to talk to you. Okay,
yeah, nice to talk to you too.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.